The murder of Buondelmonte on Easter Sunday 1216 drove a wedge between the most eminent Florentine families, a rivalry that soon exacerbated the ongoing city disputes. This fateful event was used by later historians to mark the beginning of the civil war that would drench the blooming Florence in the blood of its citizens for the next 100 years. The feud between Guelphs and Ghibellines. However, to fully grasp the Florence of that era, it is imperative to understand this dualism. A widespread misconception is that the Ghibellini in Florence supported the empire and the attempts to unify Italian territory, while the Guelfi backed the papacy and independence from imperial power. Even if those two factions were present in medieval Italy, that assumption is incorrect. They were local factions, coveting local power, and they proclaimed themselves Guelphs or Ghibellines depending on who could support them, the reigning emperor or the current pope. The origin of the terms themselves, already subject to various speculative theories in the 14th century, is irrelevant. As Bartolo da Sassoferrato, a renowned 14th century jurist, pointed out, far more important is the fact that in provinces and cities where divisions and factions exist, it is necessary that these be named in some way. Thus, in the assembly, the most common names are imposed, so to speak. And in this, there is generally no respect for the church or the empire, but only for those factions that exist in the city or province. I'm Jacopo Casagrande, your host, and this is the Italian Tales. In this episode, we'll delve deeper into the factions and power struggles that tore 13th century Florence to pieces. We'll understand their origins and see how the city soon became a battleground in the struggle between the powerful emperor Frederick II and the cunning Pope Gregory IX. Such a division in the struggle for power between Guelphs and Ghibellines would have been difficult if there had been no power to seize. The urban core of Florence had become independent from the Margraviato di Toscana, the Marquisate of Tuscany, in 1115, following the death of the legendary Great Countess Matilda di Canossa, and the extinction of the Carolingi, the dynasty that controlled the territories west of the city. From that moment, a rapid territorial expansion began at the expense of a small feudal lordship that could do little against a now consolidated urban center, and the conflict with neighboring cities. Or sometimes a political relationship as with Pisa. This led to a significant economic expansion, which will be discussed in future episodes, and the formation of the arti, artisan and merchant guilds. The Florentine Republic was established in 1138 following the conquest and destruction of the neighboring city of Fiesole, and the subsequent centralization of the population in the city. Likely aiming to emulate the Roman form of government, it was placed under the leadership of 2 consuls, assisted by 100 councillors, who set about drafting laws and statutes. While still formally under the influence of the empire, it can be assumed that these 2 city councils and council of the Senate were nonetheless members of the dominant families, comprising elements of the city's aristocracy and clergy. Regarding the arts, the concept is somewhat more complex. Associative forms of workers have been present since antiquity, whether merchants or artisans aimed at protecting common interests. Traces of these corporations, called in Latin collegia or corpora, can be found as far back as the Roman Republic. But during the late Empire and the Germanic invasions, they increasingly declined, eventually reverting to simple association of workers sharing the same trade. We will see their expansion later. For now, let's just say that they gradually gained more influence, eventually forming into true corporations. From 1182, we have evidence of an initial merchant corporation, the Arte dei Mercatanti, Art of Merchants, or the Calimala, named after the still existing street where their shops were concentrated. In the following decades, a series of other corporations appeared, each equipped with its administrative bodies, headquarters, and emblems. Thus were born the arts of the judges and notaries, wool workers, doctors and apothecaries, silk workers, grocers, furriers, and then also the second-hand dealers, shoemakers, money changers, stone cutters and carpenters, blacksmith and iron workers. This organized proliferation of artisan corporations gave the city, on one hand, an economic weight that attracted the attentions of various emperors. On the other hand, it initiated a series of internal tensions within the city, which over the years would repeatedly transform into divisions and civil wars. In 1193, the city government was reformed with the election of Gherardo Caponsacchi as podestà, the chief magistrate of the city-state, effectively abolishing the consuls and replacing them with this figure who arbitrated the city's political disputes, only nominally impartial. Attempts were then made to choose a podestà uninvolved in city politics by appointing foreigners like Gualfredotto da Milano, but to no avail. In the early 13th century, the heart of Tuscany was ablaze with tension. The Emperor Frederick II of Swabia and the popes who opposed him were on the verge of opening a new front of conflicts that would ultimately split the city-states into two factions: Guelphs, aligned with the papacy, and Ghibellines, siding with the empire. Yet, as we have noted, the divide was hardly ever as clear-cut as it appeared. Many cities strove to remain independent, ready to join the Pars Ecclesiae, the church faction, or the Pars Imperii, the empire's faction, according to circumstance. It all began when the ambitious and formidable Emperor Frederick II was excommunicated in 1227 for failing to launch a crusade within the appointed time. Even his subsequent expedition to the Holy Land, 1228-1229, driven more by diplomacy than military force, was not enough to reconcile him with the Pope straight away, as the Church meanwhile accused him of coveting territories in southern Italy and papal domains. This clash, at the highest level, rippled through Tuscany like an earthquake, aggravating a long-standing rivalries among the city-states vying for regional supremacy and already poised to wage war on one another. A powder keg was primed to explode, and in 1228 it was Florence who lit the fuse. Traditionally inclined to support the Pope, Florence led an offensive against Pistoia in 1228, assisted by Lucca, Prato, Arezzo, and Volterra. Rival Siena and Pisa tried in vain to rush to Pistoia's defense. Pistoia eventually surrendered on heavy terms, and the following year the conflict shifted to Montepulciano, coveted by Siena but swiftly protected by Florence. Once again, Florence moved quicker, forcing the attackers to withdraw. Ci partimmo da Montepulciano, e non potemmo seguire l'impresa nostra per quella volta. Lamented the sorrowful anonymous Sienese chronicler, meaning that they left Montepulciano and they couldn't follow their enterprise for that time. In the ensuing chaos, even Orvieto and Pistoia challenged allegiance more than once, reflecting a fragmented and turbulent landscape. Meanwhile, Frederick II sought to impose a general peace among the cities, calling the Diet of Ravenna, 1231, but its effect did not last. The reformation of the Lombard League and the emperor's refusal to uphold the privileges enshrined by the Peace of Constance sowed new divisions. Furthermore, this excommunication and worsening relations with the papacy emboldened certain city-states to exploit the emperor's weakness for local advantage. Others, in the meantime, dug in behind Ghibelline lines, hoping to benefit from Frederick's power. Tuscany was plunged into a near-constant warfare. After Montepulciano, the epicenter of fighting shifted repeatedly among Siena, Florence, and Pisa, drawing in smaller communities such as Poggibonsi, San Gimignano, Colle Valdelsa, and Montalcino. Medieval chroniclers from those years recount sieges, night raids, demolished fortifications, ambushes, and sudden counterattacks. These rivalries ran so deep, and the times were so tumultuous that the few surviving sources often contradict one another. Consider, for instance, the 1230 assault mounted by Florentine army against Siena itself. According to the Chronicle of the Anonymous Sienese, the attackers suffered a calamitous defeat, with hundreds killed and more than 1,000 taken prisoner. Florence's own Giovanni Villani, although, tells a completely different tale. In his account, it was the Florentines who triumphed, destroying some 20 castles and strongholds in the Sienese territory, cutting down the ancient pine of Montecellese, and returning home with over 1,200 captives. We need not to dwell on who was right, but their words shine a light on the turbulence of those years. Pope Gregory IX and Emperor Frederick II briefly appeared to reconcile, but the truce was short-lived. In 1235, Cardinal Bishop Jacopo da Pecorara pronounced a peace settlement at Poggibonsi that clearly favored the Florentines, enabling them to present themselves as the peacemakers of various Tuscan centers. Yet by 1236, divisions flared again within Florence, and the Podestà, Guglielmo XX, seen as the sympathetic to Ghibelline cause, was forced to leave the city. Florence was already split in two by internal struggles, which had degenerated into a civil war under the high towers of various families, covering the city sky at the time. Given the overwhelming Ghibelline forces aided by imperial troops, the Guelphs families abandoned the city during Easter 1239. They camped as an enemy army in the nearby village of Signa. The Ghibellines attacked and defeated them before they could consolidate and organize into a solid defensive position. Numerous Guelphs returned into the city to protect what could be saved, while others fled. Following their initial success, the Ghibellines showed clemency, perhaps in the hopes of seeing their dominion stabilize and endure over time. They attempted to gain the favor of neutral citizens, including some Guelphs. However, the civil strife within the walls did not cease, even during Florence's wars against the rival cities of Pisa and Siena. Tuscan affairs remained in turmoil, even as Frederick II expanded his influence, appointing Podestà and Capitani to govern the cities. Between 1238 and 1241, his rule was marked by the victory at Cortenuova over Milan and other pro-papal city-states in northern Italy. I would like to pause a moment. Talking about stories so far from us in time, we often risk forgetting that those are the last testimonies of human beings their wars terrible and atrocious like those of today. This is what Pierre de Levigne wrote when the dust settled on the plain of Cortenuova. Who can describe the heaps of corpses and the number of captives? The Germans dyed their swords in blood. The loyal Cremonese with the other states satiated their axes with blood. The Saracens emptied their quivers. Never in any war were so many corpses piled up. Had not night come in suddenly, none of the enemy would have fled from the emperor's hands. After that fateful day, among growing hostilities with Gregory IX, the Pars Imperii once more undermined the fragile peace. In 1241, the city of Pisa, assisted by King Enzo of Sardinia, Frederick's illegitimate son, captured the papal fleet en route to a council in Rome. The death of Gregory IX and the subsequent election of Innocent IV did little to heal the rift. The new pope subscribed to the concept of plenitudo potestatis, holding that every sovereign, even the emperor, was subordinate to him, made plain in 1245 at Lyon, when he formally deposed Frederick II. This move reignited conflicts in Tuscany, where uprisings erupted in multiple cities. Despite leaning towards the Guelphs, Florence was briefly obliged to host Frederick II's other illegitimate son, Frederick of Antioch, as imperial vicar. The latter did not establish a permanent residence in the city, but delegated his representatives to act on his behalf, who predictably supported the Ghibellin faction that dominated Florence. In 1248, the Guelphs hoped to regain strength and influence. Bologna offered them support across the Apennines, hoping to reverse their fortunes through a revolt. Without further hesitation, the Ghibellin towers were attacked on all fronts. According to the chronicler Giovanni Villani, the emperor had sent letters to the loyal Uberti family, advising them to expel from the city their enemies called Guelphs, promising them the support of a contingent of knights. Villani continues, telling us how thus began dissent and civil war in Florence, where the city began to unravel, and the nobles and all the people took sides, some on the side and some on the other, and in many parts of the city they fought for a long time. The civic struggles became increasingly violent, with fierce clashes throughout the city, where both factions had brought with them the entire mass of citizens and commoners who depended on the wealth of individual affluent families. It was in one of these clashes, near the church of San Pancrazio, that the Guelph leader, Rustico Maringolli, fell struck in the face by a crossbow bolt. Having lost their leader, the Guelphs retreated. Upon hearing of the tumults in Florence, Frederick of Antioch gathered armed troops in the castle of the nearby city of Prato to aid the Ghibellines besieged in the towers. Leading 1,600 knights, he made his way to the city gates, and with his arrival, the Ghibellines launched a counterattack. They fought at the barricades, or barriers, from one neighborhood to another, and from tower to tower, and with mangonels and other devices, they battled together day and night. The Guelphs held out for 2 days, but on the night before the Feast of Candlemas, on the 2nd February 1248, after burying their leader Rustico Maringolli in the church of San Lorenzo, they decided to abandon the city. They set off into exile, seeking refuge in the Guelphs' castles nearby, and also reached the city of Lucca, where, however, they were not warmly received. The emperor's menacing influence extended over Tuscany, and there was fear of reprisals and vendettas. Frederick of Antioch in the end ordered the demolition of the towers of the fleeing Guelphs. A decisive turning point came on the 29th of May 1249, when King Enzo was captured at Fossalta by troops from Bologna. The imperial power in Tuscany was waning, and with it the Ghibelline grip on Florence. The population was exhausted by decades of conflicts carried out by noble families who, quoting again Villani, lorded over the land and burdened the people with unbearable weights, pounds, and taxes, and tyrannized the people with severe extortions, abuses, and injuries. Seeing the battered Ghibelline army return, fallen victim to a Guelph ambush while aiding the siege of a nearby castle, the population rose in revolt. Under the leadership of Uberto da Lucca, 36 citizens, neither Guelphs nor Ghibellines, with the favor of the entire population, gathered in the towers of Maringoli and Ancchioni to give the city a new government. It was October 20th, 1250. But the true watershed arrived only weeks later, on 13 December 1250, when Frederick II died. Let me close this chapter with a small anecdote. Emperor Frederick II had always kept his distance from Florence, heeding a prophecy that foretold his demise sub flore, under the flower. By late 1250 he was in Apulia, ravaged by a severe abdominal illness. His condition deteriorated so rapidly that taking him to his palace in Lucera was out of the question, and his court sought refuge in a fortified settlement nearby present-day Torre Maggiore. Bent with pain, he asked the name of the place where he had been brought for treatment. Castelfiorentino, they replied. Frederick accepted his fate. Rumors have long swirled around the emperor's sudden passing, from poisoning to a murder plotted by another of his illegitimate sons, Manfred. We shall address that in our next episodes. For now, suffice it to say that the news of his death swept across Tuscany like a storm. With the formidable Frederick II gone, the Ghibellines lost their central figure, while the popes continued to exert pressure and assert sacred rights on the throne of St. Peter. The wars between Guelphs and Ghibellines had only just begun.